Have you ever actually stopped to consider who wrote the rules that dictate our daily lives today? I mean, really think about it. Every law, every guaranteed right, the whole structure of power that governs us, none of that just magically appeared out of thin air, right? Somebody actually had to sit down and draft it all. So today, we're looking at a man who shaped it all. We are talking about James Madison, the man versus the monument. Now, you might already know that the architectural genius behind our modern government was James Madison. But as we're going to see today, his soaring ideals of liberty and structured governance on paper fiercely contrasted with a really messy, complicated, and contradictory personal reality. So, we're going to trace Madison's life from his early days as a studious young drafter to his final years as a retired plantation owner. We'll be hitting the young political architect, designing the U.S. Constitution, the Madison presidency, the War of 1812, and finally, a complicated final legacy. All right, let's kick things off with part one, the young political architect. Madison was born into a wealthy planter family in 1751, the oldest of 12 kids. And honestly, he was kind of an unlikely figure for a political powerhouse. He was a pretty sickly child, but he had this naturally inquisitive, fiercely studious mind that just fueled a rapid political ascent. To put it in perspective, he graduates from the College of New Jersey, which we know today as Princeton University, in 1771. Boom! By 1776, he's elected to the Virginia legislature where he befriends Thomas Jefferson. Fast forward to 1779, he's working closely with Jefferson on the governor's council, and by 1780, he is called up to represent Virginia in the Continental Congress. He was the youngest delegate there at literally just 29 years old. Which brings us to part two, designing the U.S. Constitution. At the time, the original rulebook, the Articles of Confederation, was completely failing the national government. So what does Madison do? He spends months locked away, totally alone in his library, ahead of the 1787 Constitutional Convention, just intensely researching and drafting a new blueprint. It's like a giant puzzle he's trying to solve. And the result? The Virginia Plan. This laid the entire foundation for the United States Constitution in 3 clear steps. First, centralize government power. Second, create 3 distinct branches of government. And third, implement checks and balances so no single branch becomes too powerful. These exact steps, cooked up by a guy studying by himself in his library, formed the literal framework of the government we all live under today. But here's the thing, Madison wasn't just an architect who drew up the plans and walked away. No way. He was a relentless advocate. He had to convince delegates to adopt a completely new government with centralized power rather than simply tweaking the old articles. As state legislatures deliberated, he teamed up with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay to write the Federalist Papers, vigorously defending his new constitution in newspapers all over the country. He pushed and pushed until June 1788, when New Hampshire became the 9th state to vote yes, officially making it the law of the land. And he didn't stop there. Elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1789, he fought for and successfully secured the passage of the Bill of Rights. Moving right along to part 3, the Madison presidency. Okay, so leaving the purely intellectual realm of constitutional theory, we have to step into the grounded and frankly messy realities of Madison's personal life and his executive career. In February 1801, upon his father's death, James Madison inherited the Montpelier plantation estate in Virginia. And along with that land, he inherited over 100 enslaved individuals. It is a stark, unavoidable contrast. The very man who wrote the blueprints for American liberty lived a reality deeply, deeply entrenched in the institution of slavery. Meanwhile, his career was rapidly building up to the highest office in the land. As a U.S. representative, like we noted, he secured the Bill of Rights. Then, serving as Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson, he supported massive U.S. expansion through the Louisiana Purchase and backed the widely unpopular 1807 Embargo Act, which restricted trade. Ultimately, he was elected president in 1808. And it's worth noting, he actually brought several enslaved individuals to the White House to help run the household. But this era is also famously known for First Lady Dolly Madison. As the White House hostess, she threw these vibrant Wednesday drawing rooms. It was this unique social season in the fledgling capital that brilliantly managed to bring members of totally different, opposing political parties together in the same room. But of course, that leads us into part 4, the War of 1812. That political piece, yeah, it definitely wouldn't last. Global tensions were mounting, forcing a wild shift in Madison's life. The young nation was about to be severely tested, and the quiet library drafter suddenly had to become a fleeing wartime president. British forces had been actively harassing American ships, seizing cargo, and impressing American sailors into the Royal Navy. Facing immense pressure from the war hawks in Congress, A wildly underprepared United States declared war on Great Britain in June 1812. And this conflict culminated in sheer chaos in August 1814. In retaliation for the Americans burning York, British forces marched into Washington, D.C., and literally set fire to the White House, the Capitol building, and the Treasury. The constitutional architect actually had to flee his own burning capital. Fortunately, the turbulent war officially came to an end not too long after that devastating low point. Just 4 months later, a peace agreement was brokered, and the conflict finally concluded with the ratification of the Treaty of Ghent in February 1815. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, A Complicated Final Legacy. After serving 2 full terms as president, Madison retired from public office in 1817 and headed back to his Montpelier estate. In his final years, he continued to rely entirely upon enslaved labor to run his plantation. But he also became deeply involved with something called the American Colonization Society. Now, this was an organization that advocated for removing African Americans from the United States entirely and sending them to a settlement colony in Africa. Madison wasn't just a casual member here. He actually served as the society's president for 3 years, right up until he passed away at Montpelier in 1836. So we are ultimately left looking at a legacy of deep, startling contrasts. On one hand, he's most remembered as the revered father of the Constitution, right? But on the other, he was the president of the American Colonization Society and a lifelong slave owner. History is almost always shaped by individuals capable of unmatched brilliance and deep, contradictory flaws at the exact same time. It really leaves us to reflect. When we look at the monuments of our past, how do we honor the architectural genius of the laws we live by, while fully acknowledging the incredibly complicated reality of the men who wrote them?